Hello and welcome to Unplugged, an IoT podcast, where we dive deep into the fascinating world of industrial Internet of Things and automation. I'm your host, Phil Seboa.
G'day, Phil, and hi, everyone. I'm Ed Fuentes. Well, Phil, it's been a journey. We've had interesting guests, as you know, through the spaces, and sometimes we have those guests that have moved and transitioned, or not transitioned, but moved into areas of specialty, especially in this IoT space. And today is no exception to that, because today we've invited Brandon Artz. He's a technical Swiss Army knife, according to his profile, which is fantastic. But what's important here that I see that, it's such a broad range of knowledge to gather in this space. And he's been in his career, we're going to find out today, actually, how he's moved into that sort of cybersecurity, advanced automation space that he feels a specialty in. So I think there's a lot of value here for our listeners today, especially and us as well, obviously, through this journey. So, Brandon, thanks so much for joining us on this podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Brandon, your experience in industrial cybersecurity and controls engineering, maybe you can give us some insight into your journey into the world of, IT and OT convergent and that space.
Sure. Non-traditional student, went to college at 18, dropped out and kind of thought, I can figure this out and do something else. Eventually, realized I need college to kind of move forward. Went back, and when I went back, I kind of had a different mindset, and I had a little bit of knowledge your normal student doesn't. I was already into things like Linux and other things, for building cheap computers or repurposing old laptops that friends were getting rid of. So I had some footing in that realm. Decided to go back for what I originally went for, which was electronics engineering. Got an undergrad in that, eventually was convinced to stay on and go for a graduate. Originally was in controls and then pivoted into industrial cybersecurity. My mentor was more from that side of our discipline. She had a strong footing as a automation security expert at Pfizer for a very long time before she got into academia. A few long conversations with her about where I really wanted to go. And again, having some footing in things like Linux. I'd be lying if I said I didn't, YouTube how to do some of the more fun, ethical hacking things on my own hardware, but just to learn. So getting the opportunity to apply that was at a collegiate level was really great. I stayed on for a little bit and I taught. Eventually realized, there's not a lot of money in academia, and especially I wasn't on a tenure track, so I decided to dive into industry. Dived more into manufacturing, started off as a process engineer, got a really good understanding about how the process in general works, which when mixed with, my mentor was very big on documentation. I think Ira made a joke about, a tree falling in the woods. Did you hear it if it's not documented? It's funny, but in the end of the day, that harping on documentation and being a process engineer, that was really king. Having that knowledge and then applying it with my cybersecurity, my IT/OT knowledge, it's really helped me lead some initiatives at Fortune 500s or now a Fortune 1 and have the opportunity to really have my voice heard and start to put kind of the flavor I see the industry going to, which I think some people may see as outdated, but I think it's a good balance of the more modern approach, with the way we're doing, data collection and things like that. But, while still adhering to standards, like the ISA, NIST, and other frameworks that are, crucial to cybersecurity compliance.
And in that journey, Brandon, especially around the compliance side and cybersecurity, how much of that was self-taught, mentored? How much of that did you find easy to gather, or was it a hunt?
Again, coming in as a non-traditional, I like to think I asked more insightful questions than your traditional student. So I think it was a healthy blend of, them leading me to the water on what pillars to focus on, understanding something like physical security. I can wrap my head around that without a lot of a lot of college, but then getting into more of your traditional cybersecurity and network security and things, that does take a footing in the fundamentals to do it well. And so I think them leading me to the fundamentals and then allowing me the opportunity to grow. No one told me to do work on rainbow tables in grad school, but I did. I saw the application of GPUs to accelerate, the value of using rainbow tables for hash cracking, and I decided to write a paper on it. Again, they gave me the fundamentals and turned me loose on what I wanted to do. I think that was a healthy blend, and I think I really prospered under that. But it takes somebody to ask insightful questions and want to self-serve to exceed at a model like that.
In that space, because cybersecurity typically is a domain of the IT department, from my viewpoint anyway, and we know through the advancement in digital transformation and getting more data of OT, it's become a very hot topic, cybersecurity and OT, and blending that information, that knowledge into OT. That's something I think that you've been able to manage.
Yeah, like Ira and I discussed on my last time I was on a podcast, I approach it like officiating a fight in a nightclub. You have two people that maybe have valid concerns. I don't know everything about their needs or their wants or their constraints, but I've got to help those two come together, speak a common language, and resolve the issue. Whether it's hooking up a new piece of automation to an existing IT network for data collection, or working with OEMs to ensure that new machinery being sourced is coming in with the appropriate cybersecurity thoughts in mind. Communication is really key to success. And so I think that's something that doesn't get taught as well. And I think being a non-traditional and coming from service and retail, communication is pretty much a necessity. And conflict resolution is a necessity. And so having those, I think, is maybe one of the more beneficial soft skills that people can supplement. Because I think that's one we can all work on. Conflict resolution is something that's well documented. And I'd maintain it's very crucial to bridging IT and OT because, again, everyone has valid concerns and valid constraints. And we just have to get them on the table and talk about how we balance.
So in your experience of, the OT, IT landscape, like how much awareness is there of cybersecurity? Because we all talk about, at our level, maybe we talk about it, but in the general population, who's thinking about cybersecurity when they're operating these plants and manufacturing spaces?
I've worked for a couple of bigger companies, so maybe I've been more fortunate. But even the first company I worked for in automotive manufacturing, they made headlights. They're not a huge name, North American Lighting, but they're still a reputable company that makes a great product. And even there, they were very serious about it. So I think anybody who has skin in the game, as it was, they're an automotive manufacturer. If they have an issue, they could lose contracts. They also have to adhere to certain IIH, International Institute of Highway Safety, governance. And so there's a lot of data and other things that has to be collected, genealogy, things like that. But there's a lot of there's a lot of cost if you don't control that data, you don't maintain it, and you don't back it up. So I would say most sufficiently sized manufacturing companies are aware because, an OT security breach to them, it's costly. And I remember as a junior engineer hearing what some lines cost per minute, per hour, and thinking there's no way. But you step back and you do the math and you're like, okay. So again, maybe I've been lucky, but most organizations I've worked for take it seriously. That said, they all have communication issues. I would maintain that almost every company has issues because, again, IT and OT are two very different sides of the house. They can come together, but it's very, it requires a scalpel and not an axe when you go to bring that together.
You mentioned that a couple of times about that communication one. So as Phil mentioned, a lot of people are aware of cybersecurity challenges and issues. And you mentioned that potential cost that could happen in a business should they not follow. So moving from awareness to rollout or to a cyber secure system. So you mentioned the challenges communication. What are the major challenges they face from moving from an awareness to actually having a system in place that meets the standards?
Sometimes it's money. I think that there's a co-equal, communication issue because they're not advocating enough for it. But a lot of times it comes down to money. You can get a lot of people to understand something's a problem, but to get them to pay for it, it's much harder. A lot of organizations would rather throw money at a problem as it pops up, and less so at being proactive. They see the time value of money and how they invest. And again, I don't have an MBA. I don't, know, everything that goes into the financial side of it. But I would say in my experience, it's the financial piece. That's the real other hurdle here, because getting people bought in, if you can get them to communicate, they'll get bought in. But then the next hurdle is getting finance. And again, for, maybe money, let's quote unquote, maybe money, like this is, maybe I'm going to get hacked, maybe I'm not, kind of roll the dice. Sometimes people roll the dice, right or wrong. So I would say those two are the 95% of the hurdles. The technology, the knowledge, it's there. There really is the communication and the money that gets in your way a lot of times.
What are some of the practical applications that companies can do? Is it training? Is it, having the proper procedures in place? Like, as you mentioned, well-documented areas. What are the kind of key aspects to rolling out a really good cybersecurity policy?
So I've worked a lot with vendors. So in most organizations, I've set more of a governance and less of an execution role. So I've engaged with vendors, to get third parties in. I think most of them have said, what I think is straightforward. But again, having the background I have, that's why I think that way, is those services are great. But if you don't do your own due diligence first and try to get your own cyber cleanliness together first, and set a baseline for what you think is safe, I think you're sort of wasting your money, because they're just going to tell you the basics. They're going to tell you, I rode this guy's coattails through your access control system. We found this server on Shodan. Shodan.io is a website you can go to. You can type in servers. You can find IP addresses. You can figure out maybe who owns them. You didn't protect your servers. They have public-facing static IPs. Here they are. Stuff like that. If you're not doing the low-hanging fruit, then you're just paying for them to come in and do the low-hanging fruit. You're making that first pass and then maximizing that next investment. Again, money is scarce. So do the best you can by yourself to set the baseline that you think is secure based. Again, I'm not asking anyone to come up with this from scratch. There's different frameworks available from the ISA, NIST, and others that clearly spells out for various industries. Now, I've spent a lot of time recently in automated warehousing. That's a newer industry. It's not as well documented. So it's kind of, which frameworks do we reason are the best to apply here, and how do we apply them to our need? But if you don't do that baseline, you're going to pay money, a fair amount of money, to just get someone else to spell out a baseline. And I think the data is there for you to set that baseline, and then bring in that partner, and at least have someone do a third-party audit, whether that's a red team engagement to try to do actual penetration testing, whether that's just some governance review. We sit down and we look at what is the governance in a conversation like this. We don't physically engage, and we say, yeah, from a first pass, it looks good. But then that's only what you're saying it should be. That's not, did you execute what you say it should be properly? And that's where that next testing, that physical engagement gets you in. Again, I've never been the one to do that, but I've been the one to work with partners to get that done. And I think that that's the best way to maximize your resources here and do the best you can as a smaller organization.
The temptation in OT, and I've heard this a few times, is that for us to be secure, we'll just air gap our networks away from IT. We'll just create this air gap. That way we're sort of in our minds free from cybersecurity issues and all those. Look, you're nodding your head because you probably heard that talk many times. So what's the problem with that?
Oh, you can do that, and that sounds great on paper. Now, I bought this machine from vendor X, and I bought a service contract, right? I paid all this money. They're going to fix this thing the moment it breaks. Machine goes down. I have an air gap network. Vendor can't get in. Okay, I go get, I don't want to use a vendor name. I don't want to paint anyone negatively, but you go get a gateway that gives you a reverse SSL connection to the cloud or here or to there for a VPN, and then you let the vendor dial in over your IT network without ever engaging IT to tell them that you've done this. So now you have that entry point into your OT network, which is air gapped, right? And you have an unmanaged switch that just has, a single flat VLAN, and now I can just pivot around and do whatever I want. So air gap sounds good on paper until production goes down. And then someone's going to run an Ethernet cable from a printer. I'd be lying if I said I've never seen that. You go get, one of those little barrel connectors off of Amazon for $1.99. You plug in an Ethernet cable, you run it over, and you plug in this PLC, and now this guy can get to your, yeah, that sounds great. And then someone forgets to unplug that. And then Shodan or a website like that, or someone using mass scan, whatever, finds that open entry. Great. The next level they're going to get into had no thought of cybersecurity because it was air gapped. I mean, it's reality. So it really does sound good. And I'm sorry I started laughing, but I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that or seen people do stuff like that. And I just laugh because I'm like, you might as well have left the front door open and unlocked. I mean, it's not people don't think of it as a door or a window, but it's absolutely an entry point into your business.
Yeah, we've seen it, people who are starting the journey of cybersecurity, they may have one single network on site, right? That whole holistic view without any network separation. They've got the IT network in with the OT network, potentially just one network, and then any entry point is going to be really, I guess, risky when it comes into that space.
The fear as well is when when cybersecurity gets mentioned at OT level, sometimes you see the eye rolls in OT. Oh, here we go. IT going to come in with their policies and the documentation, and everything's going to take longer. Are these just the communication gaps that people have?
Yeah. I mean, again, I get back to the analogy I always default to. The two guys at the bar, neither one thinks they did anything wrong. And and without knowing, I can't tell you which one to blame, right? And so you got to get them both talking and really get them to concede, or like therapy. Maybe that's a more PG appropriate analogy, but still, you need them to sit down in couples counseling and talk to each other and get it all on the table and really understand that, it's non-negotiable. OT, we got to make money. We got to get it running. We got to make parts. We got to make money. IT, we got to protect our network. We got to protect, if there's not a separate security department, a lot of times they take the badge readers, so that's your access control, maybe your physical security pillar. But again, both are very valid. I need the company to be secure and I need it to make money. I mean, otherwise, what are we doing? But this whole, I'm just not going to come to the table and do it. We don't need that mindset. That's got to go. And I think when you set like that, you say, I'm not adhering to that. We're not doing that. I mean, if you're going to start that way, come on. Now, if there is a concession the other side is asking you to make, and you really think roll it uphill. If they don't like it, document it, blast that email out to 50 people. And when somebody says, we got that one wrong, hold that email up and say, can we go my way now? But before you have the data to prove you were right, document your disagreement and move on. My mentor couldn't have been more clear about that. She very much explained that there is a political side of industry. And, sometimes it gets down to the politics. But that doesn't mean you just walk away. You document everything. You state clearly why, and you move on. And I'd be lying if I said those emails didn't resurface in previous jobs and that, my voice didn't get heard. So, that's how if you want advice for the younger kids coming in, that's how you do it. I mean, not everyone's going to think you know everything. I don't know everything. I get stuff wrong. I've sent those emails about this is what I think we should do, and then later on send a rebuttal to say, never mind, I was wrong. And I haven't done that many. You got to be careful how many of those you send out. You can't have too many misses, but you're never going to bat 1,000 either. It's just not reality.
Absolutely. I guess let's pivot away from cybersecurity at this point, and talk about, I guess, the broader term of automation and the landscape of industrial manufacturing and all these different segments. I guess you've worked in Industry 4 initiatives and smart factories, and you mentioned, automated warehousing and those types of spaces. What are the key trends at the moment that you're seeing? I know we've got Industry 4 there. What kind of things are you seeing out there in the world?
So when I was at Stanley, I was in the I4O group, but my role there was the connected factory team. So we were really focused on how do we make connectivity, how do we do it secure, and how do we get the data into a format where we can start to gain some intelligence. I think at the time, I screamed as loud as I could at the rooftops that we need a foundation before we start painting the house. I think the industry is getting that foundation. I mean, thanks to podcasts like this, people are getting the knowledge. They're getting things and getting questions to ask, going on Google and saying, I heard this term, what does it mean? And the connectedness is getting there. Again, there's maybe some improvements on security. That aside, the next step is, machine learning and AI. I'll be honest, in the last, few months, I've been a lot more involved in building stuff at home with AI, using LLMs. There's a open source platform, Obama. You can pull down different models, run AI at home, buy yourself a small NVIDIA Jetson and make your own Alexa. It's pretty interesting. And looking at technologies like RAG that are at augment to LLMs, then you can really start to make things happen. You can start to pull in a lot of tribal knowledge, internal SharePoint knowledge that's poorly formatted in text. And we could argue about the performance and how long queries will take and how many tokens per second you'll get, yada, yada. That aside, you can see the writing on the wall. That's the future. If I have an error code on a machine and I have a SharePoint that has an Excel document that has a error code in this, or maybe it's a SQL, maybe it's something else, just whatever. AI has the intelligence to dig through that. Now, is there a better way to do it? Yeah, there's absolutely a better way. I would hate to be the one to manage an Excel workbook that is the back. I'm not advocating for that. But what I'm trying to get at is AI can also help you turn that Excel workbook into a JSON object, into an XML object, into a file that can then go into a bigger, more well-designed system and get you out of Industry 3.0. I mean, people talked about Industry 3.0 and then came to 4.0. And I think before we ever got to 4.0, they were talking about 5.0. I never rode the hype. I always kind of stayed less on the bleeding edge and more on the cutting edge. I kind of, I like where it becomes profitable. That seems more sustainable to me. You know what I mean? The other stuff, it's cool. Don't get me wrong. And I'm very grateful for the work those people do. But it's also a lot dicier. And you know what I mean? It's a lot more trial and error. Whereas, again, being a process engineer, I'm more interested in how can we refine our process. I mean, in automotive, we'll shave half a second off and spend 2 months figuring that out. I mean, really, we'll spend months figuring out how can we make a part 1 second faster. Because 1 second is a lot of parts once you go across a year, right? And so that quantity of scale, where do we take this really cool, interesting bleeding edge and we do the quantity of scale on it and make it just the coolest cutting edge thing? And so that's really been kind of where I've tried to stay in this. And so, again, I see from that vantage point, I see what all the work that's been done on LLMs and some of the more advanced ML and AI stuff, it's coming into the cutting edge and actually being used. So it's really interesting. And I think that's where the industry is going. And, I got the moniker, the technical Swiss Army knife, from a previous coworker, because I've done a lot of different stuff. I liked it because that's how I've always kind of approached industry. And I think for you to succeed in the future, you're going to have to know a little bit about a lot. You don't have to be an expert, but you at least have to know enough to Google or YouTube and figure it out on your own.
Are you seeing that more and more now, Brandon? Because I am definitely with the sort of, obviously I'm a bit older. I'm seeing young people coming in with this hunger of knowledge, and yes, and they're using YouTube and all the other areas to learn and to find out. In the past, we seem to be deep. Now we need to, like you mentioned, need to have a good fluency across different disciplines or different knowledges. So in that case, what are some of the key things what are the areas that your Swiss Army skills are? You mentioned cyber industry for documentation. What other things do you add into your tool set there that you have?
I had a fair amount of background in RF engineering, so I've done a lot with RF as it pertains to cybersecurity. I also have done a lot with physical as it pertains to cybersecurity, lock picking, and other things. Occasionally I'll sit on the couch and pick a lock. I got a whole bag of locks I've picked up over the years and a whole set of picks. And yeah, instead of some people sit there and text or doom scroll, sometimes I'll sit down and pick a lock. I have a ton of different things around the house, little gadgets I've amassed over the years. I just got a U console. It's like a small computer, and somebody online sold a chip that then gives it multiple radios, long range, LoRaWAN, SDR, and a bunch of other stuff. And so, getting up to date, or staying up to date, I should say, because that's the key. It's always changing. It's always growing. It's always evolving. And so you just have to stay up with it, because I think, I'm older than I look. I'll be 40 in less than a year. I remember growing up with an encyclopedia. I was fortunate enough, my parents had a set of encyclopedias. I remember growing up with those. That's where my knowledge came from. And if I didn't know a word, the dictionary. And, but there's no like AI or ML to help you. If you misspell a word and it's too misspelled, you're going to be 20 pages off. You know what I mean? And then so watching the world go from encyclopedias to dial-up, and watching the dial-up go from just textual HTML to JavaScript, and watching the growth as it's gone. If it's taught me anything, it's that you have to keep up. I shared a post years ago, and it's my thought on it, that our careers, and I know they're nonlinear, but they're sort of like the slope-intercept equation. You have a mx plus b equals y, and your b is your experience. That's where you've been, that's what you've done, and your m is your capacity to learn. And so I've really, I like having a solid b, but I've really tried to focus my time on the m. So my wife gets on me, but I scroll a lot, Medium, and other different platforms to find articles, keep up on new Python frameworks. I think there was one, I'm going to butcher its name, like TTXYS or something. It's for a voice, text to voice and voice to text library for Python. Well, you put that with a llama, and now you have a rough but a homemade Alexa, right? And so, maybe there's a better way to do it, but it's at home. I'm having fun. And if I got 15 minutes to pick up the tablet, RDP into my home server, play around for a moment, or pick up a radio device I'm working on, here and there. I've got a small child. He does go to sleep, and so there's times after he goes to sleep or he takes a nap, hey, I got 30 minutes. I'm going to go code for 30 minutes. But it's always looking at what is the most up to date. And I have a lot of projects I just never finish, because it's always coming so fast that that new shiny object's there, and you're like, I want to do this now.
I can definitely attest to the unfinished projects that litter my desk at the moment as well. But, to that point, it's fun trying all these things out, getting a little bit more knowledge. I absorb a lot more information, but, out of having fun with these particular different applications, and, just learning little bite-sized information than reading through a whole encyclopedia of text. I'd rather have those burst sprints of knowledge than getting too deep into the weeds of it all. So yeah, absolutely understand that. I guess in your experience in your career, has there been any sort of maybe sites or something that you've seen that you thought was really cool, or really, I guess, mentionable as an honorable mention to this podcast?
I think, and I can go through quick, is three of the industries I've been in. It was wild to see automotive, to see how efficient it is. I have still not seen anything run as efficiently as automotive. I grew up in the Midwest. Again, I worked for a company that supplies headlights to Honda, Toyota, Subaru, and a lot of other companies. Went to the Toyota plant and the Subaru plant near my home. I bought a Subaru from that plant because the efficiency in that place was insane. Again, automotive is the most razor thin, efficient, razor thin margin, efficient machine you've ever seen run, and it runs well. So I would say seeing that was very beneficial. Working at Stanley, I got a lot of opportunity. They make a wide catalog of products, from power tools to storage lockers to most people don't know, but they currently have had aerospace holdings. They used to have medical device holdings. A lot of the automated doors you go in and out of, at least out east here, are Stanley access doors. So working there, I got to see a lot of industries, a lot of processes up close and get some understanding, very beneficial. But where I've been the last few years, the scale of automated warehousing has been wild to see. I got to see it at a very macro level. It's Symbiotic, where they're doing distribution centers. And then since then, I've got to see it at a more micro level within Walmart stores, within Walmart automation and robotics. So it's been really interesting to see how they approach the macro and the micro. Again, very interesting industry, and it's very much where the industry is going. It just is, and that's why I say is staying up on it is key, because I think opportunities will be less and less as we automate more and more. It's just the nature of things.
And when you talk about automotive being so slick, so efficient, and I think you've mentioned at that earlier part of your career you were there. If you were to go back, are there things you would change or do? Are there as you learn, do you then take the knowledge back to opportunities where things could have got better, and what could be better? What could improve?
I don't think that it was the automotive industry that got me to go. I was a process engineer, and we did a lot of stuff around collecting data and using it to improve the process. But it was more of the chemical analysis side. I remember doing glue studies on an adhesive. That was less fun. More fun, we got to put a lot of Mustang headlights in an oven and see where the glue came out to simulate stress in like the Nevada desert or wherever. So there was some destructive testing that was more fun. I mean, we used thermocouples. It was very scientific, I assure you. But it was a lot of fun. And so that was a very good side of it. But again, the more chemical engineer analysis, it was less interesting, and I recognized that I got the value I needed. And also that job was in Illinois, right on the Indiana border. I literally grew up there, and I saw an opportunity to get into I-4O, this cutting edge industry on the East Coast in Hartford. And since then, I've basically moved up the East Coast. Now I'm in Boston. I've got to where I want to be in terms of the opportunities. So no ill will. I think automotive is great. Honestly, like I said, it's already super efficient, and it's done that through standards. I don't know that automotive has a lot to clean up. They're one of the more rock solid industries I've ever had an opportunity to work in.
Are they generally based on sort of legacy infrastructure, or are they moving with the times? Are they up to date and bringing in these more advanced technologies?
The good thing about automotive is, cars change. They don't make the same headlight for 20 years. So there's a lot of changeover. Automotive is where I first saw the concept of a standard cell. You have a piece of automation equipment, there's a standard connection, and then you have a tooling jig, right? And I can swap out, and I can make Honda headlights on this, swap out the tooling, and now I'm making Nissan. Or swap it out, and I'm making Toyota. They really were on leading the edge on advanced automation for standard cell deployment. And as they redo a line, they have the opportunity to introduce a new standard cell, because that tooling connection is still the the pre-agreed upon tooling, and that's set by the automotive supplier or the automotive company, not the supplier, because they want to be able, if you can't make parts, they're going to take that tooling jig, go right down the road to someone else. Their wiring harness is the exact same spec. It's going to plug in. They're going to make the parts. You're going to lose the contract. So they're very clear on how that works. And there's opportunity for you to work with the supplier, the car manufacturer, to come out with a new generation of cell. And as you do that, you introduce a newer PLC and not every time, but I would say we rarely came across stuff in my first job that didn't have an Ethernet port. And we already had a fair amount of, layer 3, layer 2 managed switches throughout our facility. Again, automotive was they were a good example for me to learn from.
You mentioned that the emerging technologies like AI and ML are things you're playing with, obviously, and seeing, and we know it's coming. How much of industry is ready for that?
I think it's there. I was lucky enough to work under a gentleman at Stanley, Thomas Schwenk. And I remember we built a product together, an internal product for data collection, specifically, like I said earlier, connected factory. We just wanted to get all the data, throw it into a database, and then let another system make intelligence. But we needed a way to kind of look at that data and kind of slice it up. And at the time, before his departure, he was looking at what is that next step. And there was a framework from Apache called, I believe, Flink. And it was basically an ML pipeline that let you do some process analysis. There's also a lot of other ways to kind of fit that in. And so throughout the years, I kind of see people piecemeal in that next step, but standardizing on that, I think it's going to be the real big step for industry. We already have standards on how we do I/O interfacing and other stuff. I think getting to, and I hear people call it the unified namespace or other, getting to a standard that we can agree upon, like we do with cybersecurity, at least an industry level. Automotive, you do it your way. Tool manufacturers, you do it your way. But getting to that standard framework is going to allow so much more plug and play. And I really think that's the future. I think we're all doing it a little differently, and if we standardize, we can make it so much more cost effective. And that gets back to my earlier point where funding is scarce, and especially, let's not be naive, the external, what's going on in the world, funding may become scarce due to uncertainty. And so when funding is scarce, you have to maximize it, and you do that through well thought out things and standardization.
Yeah, so I guess as you been through those steps and you kind of identified, maybe we should step back and okay, here's a question for you: what makes a smart factory?
I would say having the data visibility at a minimum, and having that to where it can be at least brought down to I don't want to use a single page application, a SPA. But that's what it is bringing it down to a single page application where somebody in leadership can look at a single pane of glass and understand how's my factory doing holistically. Ideally, you would want to be able to drill down into departments and get a lot more intelligence. But I think that's really the end goal. I mean, when I worked at Stanley, I worked within the operations vertical. So operations is the people leading the show. They make sure the money is there and they make sure the money is made. So, getting that bought in and pushing it from that standpoint, I think is the right approach. But then being able to get them that single page application where they can drill in and really understand one facility, one region, maybe down to one line. But, do they need to know what was the temperature on a random bearing? No. We should be collecting that. We probably shouldn't get a part count and not get the other stuff if it's an easy lift. We're leaving money on the table. But really, that's it, is getting operations the visibility they need so they can react quickly. Again, automotive, getting that intelligence is highly valuable because you can immediately see where everything's going. I mean, there's a reason why they implement MES and all of these systems within manufacturing. And you need that intelligence. And so my opinion, a smart factory is a way to view your operations from a single vantage point.
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of progressing to having that holistic view of the businesses and the operations, right? Is having less siloed data, having everything connected. That's why IoT is, moving up in the rankings of priorities as well, that connectivity portion. I guess what do you see as the next big step for them, the future of their businesses? Is it more connectivity? Is it more people development? Where do you see the business going?
I don't think it's a one size fits all. If the variety of industry I've worked in has taught me anything, there really isn't a holistic, this is going to do everything you need. I think identifying the stakeholders and then doing a plant walkthrough, working with operations, working with the different verticals, getting back to communication, and getting the understanding of what is the actual need for us specifically. That's the easiest thing, or the thing you should focus on first. When I was at Stanley, we had a lot of industries, we had a lot of plants, they were all over the world, they were all acquisitions. They're a company built upon acquisition. So they buy companies and they acquire, well, this company had this standard and this other company had this standard. That complicates things drastically. And so I think that the industry has to look at how do we bring that variety together, but how do we do it in a flexible manner? And so that's really the challenge. So I wish there was this one size fits all, but I think it's, due diligence on identifying those problems and working with the proper people internally to solve them. I see a lot of companies want to outsource stuff, and that's great. But at some point, you have to keep people internal who understand how to actually monetize that, or you're going to get stuck in this loop of, I got to pay this guy to help me make this money, but now I don't have anyone internal to manage the system. So I've got to hire this vendor to come in and do these services. And that's why I really think it's a full frontal approach, because the reality is most companies probably need to identify a new vertical. As we take people off of the floor, and I shouldn't say off the floor, but as we move them from what they're doing for, I was always taught robots do the 3Ds, the dirty, the dull, and the dangerous. As we move people from the 3Ds into other vertical or other areas, obviously their roles are going to shift. So we need new verticals for what those people will do, and how do we repurpose them? Because again, their knowledge is key. Did I know how to make a headlight? Oh no, I still don't know how to make a headlight. And I can tell you, I was always enamored, especially mold flow engineers. These guys, they figure out how to do all the plastic molding and all the physics of the flow, and it's art. I mean, it's a crazy skill set I just don't possess. But bringing all that together and understanding what are his needs. I don't have to understand his process, but what are his needs? And getting all of that together and getting that through, that I think that's what you have to do for these to be a successful venture.
You mentioned having internal skill set as well. I think that was one of the things you pointed out, that yes, you can outsource it, but having that knowledge in-house or building that knowledge in-house is important. What's that knowledge look like? I mean, how a lot of our listeners are definitely in the OT space, and many of them on that journey of helping the business they work in to be Industry 4. They want to have an Industry 4 team. I love the concept of the Industry 4 team you had at Stanley. What a great way to really adopt and have a collaborative approach to this. So what's in Australia, or most of our listeners, some of them don't work in large multinationals, they're working for smaller businesses. What do you suggest for them to, in that space, to what they should be learning, skills, updates? Yeah, how can you help them?
I got very lucky that there was some people that were my senior at North American Lighting, at Stanley, and some other companies that have really been there to kind of help me on my journey. And I noticed one thing is the industry was shifting. I noticed that in college too. Most people, again, I'm almost 40. I'm kind of in the middle. The kids that are younger, they're much more going towards computer science, and their footing is more in Python and C# and that side of the house. Whereas the people older than me, they're more electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, controls engineers, and they're learning the software side. And so the key that I see is we're losing a lot of that knowledge. I didn't have a lot of money before going back to college, so I worked on my own cars. So I got the hands-on how to do the mechanical. But a lot of kids I interacted with at a collegiate level, they just don't have that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the people who are leaving the industry to leave their mark on it through their knowledge. I mean, we talked earlier about RAG and AI. This is taking in data and letting AI, understand that knowledge and then help you with it. I mean, getting that knowledge, that tribal knowledge documented, that's key. As people leave the industry, we need a way to keep that knowledge there. I remember, and I'm not going to remember the name, but somebody I worked with at Stanley had brought in a product that was like an I4O product. It was a good app, but it was for machinery where you scan a QR code and then a maintenance technician pops up in a video and has a walkthrough on how to do whatever the job is. That's great, and I think as we move into, and we're still a little ways away, but into, AR, XR, augmented reality, that kind of stuff. I've seen the stuff where you have the little camera. I've used one actually that I think it was called RealWear, and it's a camera on a hard hat, and we could be here and you would be seeing the machine, and I can draw on it with Zoom or whatever the tool is, and I can circle something, and that's really cool because now I can give you my knowledge over Zoom. But let's close that feedback loop and get rid of me. I don't need to be on the call. Let's get markers on there. And again, I don't pretend to be an augmented reality person. Again, I stay on the cutting edge. That's more bleeding in my opinion. But eventually they should, from what I understand, be able to, show you on the machine. Well, we mix AI in with that. You don't need me anymore. This thing will tell you. And we can take someone's tribal knowledge on 100 different error codes or 100 different failures, get that in there, and then now it's like they're still working here, and we brought that knowledge in. And again, it gives those people who truly made this industry great the opportunity to leave their knowledge behind and watch the industry succeed. And I really have respect for the people before me. I very much noticed, you guys did some work. I mean, it really is great, and that we need to maintain that knowledge. If we lose that, no disrespect to any of the more computer science people, but the knowledge, it's going to be hard to get back. I mean, a lot of that is trial and error, and AI just isn't going to tell you about trial and error. Only pain and money will tell you about trial and error. It's the truth, and so we really need to keep that knowledge in. And I think using AI and other technologies to keep that knowledge as people leave the industry, I think that's probably what we'll see over the next few years, because we'll start to realize, again, through pain and money, that we're missing that knowledge. And again, that's what it typically takes. Like we said earlier, people don't want to pay for it up front. They'd rather wait till it hurts really bad and pay for it. Machinery and tribal knowledge, it's no different, right? We'll wait till we realize we need it, then we'll throw a bunch of money to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Brandon, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast, and it's been great chatting about cybersecurity and the people part as well of industrial automation as well.
Definitely. Thanks very much, for sharing your experience, Brandon. It's been an interesting journey you were on. I love how you tinker and learn, and I think you're correct. Look, I know where you're right. I mean, in the industry, if you're not relevant, you're redundant, basically. You got to keep learning, keep adopting, and you can't, especially now, you need to be fluent in many parts of the space we're in to have the conversations you mentioned and to be open and to hopefully also pass down knowledge. So thanks again for sharing your journey with us.
Do you have any final thoughts? Actually, is there someone that you can reach out into our audience, or you want to, connect with? How can people connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. Brandon Artz, like the gentleman said, it says ITOT Swiss Army knife, or I don't remember. Again, someone else gave me that, and I just said, ooh, I like that. So yeah, LinkedIn. I'm on Medium too. I publish occasionally, but not as much as I probably should. And I really just want to say thanks to my family, the people who helped me come up, whether it be people in academia, people at jobs, coworkers, and at the end of the day, my wife and my son. Without them, I'd be bored. I don't know that it would be as much fun as it is without them. And as far as knowledge, I think you hit on it, Ed. I said it a little differently in college, But I would always say, I adapt or I die. And then that's it. Is you just adapt or you die, and there's not really another choice in life, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Look, and to all our listeners today, don't forget to subscribe to Unplugged and IoT podcast for more episodes with industry leaders, thought leaders, innovators, guys on the tools. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll check you out next time.